Welcome to the award-winning Superhuman Academy podcast, where we interview extraordinary people to give you the skills and strategies to overcome the impossible. And now, here's your host, Jonathan Levy.
But I know you're very well known for your work in attachment theory. I'd love if you could share, how can people identify which one they are, and if this is an area where they need to maybe do a little bit of self-work?
Absolutely. No, I love this. Is a great tangent. I enjoy talking about this stuff maybe the most. So number one, we actually have an attachment theory quiz at the Personal Development School, and it's right on our homepage there, so it's easy to access. You can take a quiz, but if you're just listening to this, here are the core qualities that you'll see of the different attachment styles. So I'm going to sort of map this picture out. So imagine you're a child, and research has proven that we essentially get our early subset of attachment patterns between the ages of 0 to 2 years old, which is quite young, but it's those very initial imprints of how we learn to relate to others. So these things can change over time. We see all the time. People can be secure, for example, and have secure parents, and then maybe there's a loss in the family, or somebody becomes an addict, or there's a divorce, or something's taking place, and then that person, even at 8, 9, 10, 15 years old, transforms into an insecure attachment style. So again, it sort of begs the question, if it can transform in a negative way, obviously we can change it in a positive way. And so if you imagine that this young child who has two secure parents, those parents, one of the first qualities that they need is attunement. So they need, when they cry, the parent shows up. When they express a need as they get a little bit older, that need is, even if it can't be met, it's at least seen, heard, understood, validated to a certain degree. It's not dismissed, rejected, shamed, any of that. So one of the really core qualities of secure is that you learn that, my needs are worthy of being met. My emotions are worthy of being expressed. It's safe to do so. And as a result, you build self-confidence in you to the same degree, and you learn to hold space for others in the same way. So if we use that as sort of a model to then look at the insecure attachment styles, and we look at dismissive avoidant, fearful avoidant, and anxious preoccupied, what the anxious individuals, here are some of the core qualities that you'll see for anxious individuals. Number one, you'll see that they deeply fear abandonment and loss. And because of a lot of this inconsistency in childhood or even in later relationships, somebody can be secure and then be in a 15, 20-year marriage with somebody, let's say, very dismissive, and become, as a result, a lot more anxious and develop these sort of anxious edges around their attachment style. So again, these things are all mutable. So when we look at the anxious individual, they tend to fear abandonment, fear loss, fear rejection. They tend to have certain core wounds, I notice, at the subconscious level, these sort of beliefs and stories they're carrying about themselves. And these are things like, I'm not good enough, I'm unworthy, I might lose love, or love is easy to lose, or I'm unlovable even. And they tend to have these deep fears and basically assumptions that they will be rejected in time. And as a result of this, they become hyper vigilant around these things. And what this creates is this output of stories that's really easy to tell because the brain loves to fill in the blanks. So for example, let's say you have an anxious person and their partner comes home and is cold or a little bit shut off because they had a really long day at work. Maybe they had a tough day. The anxious person is less likely to be able to see, maybe they're going through something, and their brain is more likely to jump to these conclusions based on these internal stories they're already carrying about themselves. Like, I'm about to be rejected. This person's falling out of love with me. I'm not good enough. I did something wrong. I'm unsafe. Something bad's going to happen. And so they fill in these blanks based on these early core wounds that they've experienced. So that's your anxious. And you'll see the anxious have behaviors that are like becoming clingy when they feel afraid, sometimes calling repetitively, not respecting boundaries that somebody's communicated because they're desperate to feel safe and get that connection. And the marker of the anxious preoccupied is that they tend to have difficulty self-soothing. So that's at one end of the spectrum. And then we have our dismissives at the other end. And the dismissives, again, as we were mentioning earlier, they tend to have some form of emotional neglect in childhood. And often what I found in working with so many people is that dismissives often have emotional neglect that flew under the radar. Like, the parents were great at showing up for the physical needs and we're good at being supportive in terms of, education your belongings, a safe household, but there wasn't this like emotional connection or bond, and there wasn't a space, usually because one or more of the parents was dismissive themselves, there wasn't a space to feel safe communicating your feelings, expressing emotion, these sorts of things. And that can happen for a number of different reasons. But what we see in the dismissive is when you're looking for qualities to identify, it's usually that the dismissives tend to be a little bit cold, they're a little bit slow to warm up. They can be sort of charming and have that nice quality to them, but there's this wall that you might feel like you're hitting with this individual because they haven't had that deeper attunement. So they haven't had this opportunity to learn how to attune to others naturally because that wasn't shown for them and thus wasn't learned. So dismissives can be a little bit cold, a little bit slow to warm up. They dislike vulnerability very much. Anything that requires too much vulnerability at any point in time, they usually feel shame around. And they'll get sort of the shame hangovers if they overexpress or anything like that, but it's something that they rarely do anyways. Dismissive avoidants tend to fear commitment. They tend to, when somebody comes really close and gets very close to them, they tend to naturally pull away. And over the years, I've discovered that this is something that really happens at like the nervous system level. There's a natural shutting down response. And they feel that there's a high priority in their lives for things like safety, security, control. They tend to be very focused on, a relationship to them means like harmony, safety. They don't like drama. They don't like fighting. And sometimes they can be a little bit conflict avoidant until they sort of hit a level where they can also burst after holding it in for quite some time. So these are the people you'd see in your adult relationships that are, afraid to commit, like to take their time, slow moving, these sorts of things. And then our fearful avoidance, right in the middle, are individuals who tended to experience a little bit of trauma in childhood to a certain degree. So these would be things like a lot of fighting in the home, violence in the home, maybe one or both parents struggled with addiction. And so the big marker here is that there's no attachment strategy for the fearful avoidant. You look at the anxious and they're like, I soothe through others. You look at the dismissive and they're like, I soothe on my own. The fearful avoidant doesn't really learn either because they feel like they're always walking on eggshells in their home space. So it's like, is mom going to be nice today? Is she going to be mean today? Is dad going to be this way or this way? And they tend to have this pattern with their caregivers where they never really know what's going on. So they develop this extreme hypervigilance. And they have their anxious side because sometimes the caregivers are nice and warm and loving. And they have this dismissive side because oftentimes the caregivers are exactly the opposite and emotionally very unavailable and even hurtful. And so one of the big markers for the fearful avoidant is that they oscillate so much between their anxious side and their dismissive side. And a big distinguishing factor is they generally struggle to trust more than any other attachment style.